This is the last confirmed point of view of Iwona Wieczorek, who disappeared from the Polish coast 15 years ago this week. Only 19, Iwona was graduating senior high and was preparing to go to college. On the night of July 16th, 2010, she went out with her friends to the nearby town of Zapot. After an argument, she decided to walk the 4 miles home in the early morning by herself. A security camera caught her walking along the beach promenade in Gdańsk at 4:12 a.m. This was the last time she was seen confirmed alive, and to this day, she has never been found. I really don't make true crime videos on this channel and I focus more on history, but this disappearance was a significant part of Polish law enforcement history, taking the country by storm and leading to reforms in their missing persons process. I just got the idea for this video a couple years ago when I was living in Gdańsk, just a few blocks from where Iwona Wieczorek disappeared. I walked the same park she was last seen in almost every day, and I saw that there was virtually no English coverage of this case. Even the Netflix limited series about this case is only available if you VPN yourself to Poland. So today we're going to look at the case of Iwona Wiechorek's disappearance, and using my time living in that area, ruling out one of the more common theories of what happened to her. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and let's just get back into the video. July 2010. Iwona Wieczorek was a 19-year-old girl living in the Polish city of Gdańsk, one of the nation's largest cities. Specifically, the Wieczorek household was located here, just on the edge of the Przemorze district, just a kilometer from the Baltic Sea. Just north of the area was the neighboring city of Sopot, a tourist city with a lively downtown and beach life. It was a common party spot for locals, replete with bars, clubs, and other forms of adult recreation. Iwona, like many people her age, frequented this area. Months earlier, she had broken up with her boyfriend, Patrick, who incidentally turned out to be a distant cousin. This relation didn't seem to be the cause of their breakup, however, and they allegedly maintained cordial, normal relations afterwards. Iwona had started to see other men, not very seriously, but nonetheless, including a local police officer by the name of Marcin, who she was with at the time. Iwona's and Patrick's paths continued to cross, however, including a particularly interesting night in the second week of July, when she encountered some of her ex's friends in Ronald Reagan Park. Yes, named after that Ronald Reagan. The park is relatively large, about a mile end to end and almost a kilometer wide at its deepest. The south of the park is traditional, with grassy lawns, playgrounds, and walking paths, and water features, but the north is covered in trees. Hidden in these woods are the remnants of early 20th century bunkers and gun emplacements made by the German Empire. Along the north of the park is a paved promenade, which runs for miles next to the beach. If one followed the promenade all the way to the east, they would be just across the harbor from Westerplatte, the site of the first battle of World War II. Anyways, back to the story. Iwona seems to have walked through Reagan Park after her nights out. On one of these nights in early July, some fight happened, but the details of it are murky. According to one of Iwona's friends who was with her that night, Iwona saw some of her ex Patrick's friends in a fight. She tried to break them up, and in the process was hit accidentally. She would later text Patrick complaining about this, but he seems to have brushed it off, and no one, including Iwona, seemed particularly concerned about the incident afterward. The hard facts of the case are relatively sparse, but statements by her friends and family allow us to piece together the night of her disappearance to a certain point. On July 16th, Iwona went with her mother to her work at a salon where she got her hair and nails done. Afterwards, she went to hang out with her friends, including Adria, who lived in the same development of apartments as her and her mom. Around 5 p.m., Iwona texted her mother that she was going out that night and she might be home late or might stay the night at Adria's. At 10:30, Adria and Iwona were picked up by some boys they knew, including one of their good mutual friends, Pavel. Before hitting the clubs, they went to a pregame at Paweł's grandfather's allotment. Sometime between 11 and midnight, the crew headed over to Zapot to a new closed establishment called the Mandarinka Club. They didn't stay there long and went to the also now closed down Dream Club down the street. Through the night, Iwona's friends reported that she seemed distracted and had a change in her demeanor. She was on her phone a lot, before that was a normal thing, and texting someone, although none of her friends knew who, or at least they said they didn't know. An argument broke out among the friends, and again, we don't know exactly about what or how intense it was, although it is often said that Adria said something about Iwona's ex, who was also out that night at another bar a couple miles away. That being said, it's unclear if that would make Iwona upset, given she seems to have moved on from Patrick, but who really knows? Iwona stormed out of the club, but her friends convinced her to come back, and she ended up storming out again around 2:30 a.m. This second time seemed to have been more intense, with name-calling and maybe even some shoving. Iwona stormed off, leaving the group and heading home by herself. However, this behavior was not abnormal for her. Iwona was often outspoken and could be temperamental. According to her friends, she had made scenes and stormed away from the group multiple times in the past, so they weren't particularly concerned about her at the time. Again, though, her friends have been kind of uncooperative and inconsistent through the whole process and investigation, so this might be incorrect. As Iwona headed north and got onto the promenade to walk home, her friends tried to reach her. They seem to have called her 2 times, once where she answered and said she was gonna go home, and another time where she didn't even pick up. Soon after, the rest of the group went south to the public transit stop, and at that point, Adria got a cab to head home. We are only able to piece Iwona's whereabouts from cell data and sparse security footage from this point on. She moved north up Zapots Square before turning right onto Grunwald Street, where she was caught on camera. She then crossed the street and moved up Piastov Street towards the water to the promenade. This leg of the trip was less than half a kilometer. Around 3:30 a.m. on the 17th, Iwona texted Adria to call her again, although they only texted from this point here. It doesn't seem like they actually called each other. Iwona said she was around the second access point of the beach from the Zapot Square, and around here she likely stopped for a bit to text Adria and figure out her next move. The two agreed that Iwona would meet her back at her house, and Iwona would get her things from Adria's balcony before going to her own place. In this exchange, Iwona also said that someone was bothering her. Given what happened next, this text sounds ominous, but it is entirely possible that it was just some drunk cat calling her, and given that she never mentions any issues like that after this text, it's likely that the bothering person wasn't too much of an issue. With her plan sorted, Iwona moved southeast along the promenade. At around 4 a.m., her phone died just about the time that Adria was getting home. Iwona's stepfather claims to have heard Adria outside alongside Iwona, although, given security camera footage, this is unlikely unless he is misremembering the times completely. Meanwhile, Iwona stopped into the Banana Beach Club where she had heard her ex Patrick was. She was now only about 2 miles from home, however, she couldn't find him in there and continued on her way. The last place that Iwona was confirmed seen alive was as she passed beach entrance number 63 at 4:12 a.m. The security camera captures her walking by, a man seemingly drunk with a towel over his shoulder also walking behind her, along with other passerbys on the street. After this, Iwona totally disappears. As the crow flies, she was just over a mile from home, and the route she took at this point is unknown. She may have simply continued on the promenade, then cut south on the major path through Reagan Park, or she may have cut through the park some other way, or simply cut south and walked along the street. But no matter what, this is where the trail stops, and what happened to her after 4:12 a.m. at entrance 63 is completely unknown. What, where, who, and why? Those are the major questions that remain unsolved in this case. and obviously when as well, I guess. Starting with the what, it seems relatively straightforward 15 years later that Iwona was killed and or kidnapped. Getting more specific than this is kind of impossible, although it is likely that if she was trafficked locally, she would have been spotted by now. So in my opinion, she was most likely either trafficked to a place further away, like the Middle East or Russia, or she was killed. That being said, there is debate on the where. Was Iwona killed in Reagan Park, or was she taken and killed somewhere else? Significant effort was taken into searching the park, and understandably, of course, in the Netflix limited series on Iwona Wieczorek, the Reagan Woods are described as, quote, having pretty wild spots, and the series' footage of the area appears to corroborate that. The police sent dozens of officers to comb the water and woods of Reagan during their investigation, and private detectives focused on the area heavily as well, including a quote-unquote breakthrough in 2021 when Iwona's clothing was said to have been found just next to where she was last seen. This breakthrough is largely believed to have been a staged hoax, however. As someone who frequently walked in and explored Ronald Reagan Park, I would firmly plant my flag on the claim that Iwona was taken somewhere else. In my opinion, there is just no way that anything happened to her in that park, and I will explain why. First and foremost, the park is just not remote. I know that from the air it kind of looks very woody, but this is a maintained European forest. In most of this area, there is zero underbrush. The trees are all in rows. This is compounded by the fact that there are roads and trails crisscrossing this whole area. On Google, it only looks like there's like a few roads or whatever. That's just inaccurate. There is a crap ton of paths all through the forests here. When I was there, I tried to do an experiment and see if I could find a place where I couldn't be seen from a path. Mind you, this happened in April, so it was before the foliage was fully out. But as it turned out, I couldn't. This is the most remote spot I could find in the park. It's kind of on the eastern side of the park. And even then, it was less than 50 yards from a path. I could see the path, and you can see like a climbing park area right nearby as well, through the trees. In this same area, there's even electric scooters that homeless people dragged there, so it's not even like this more isolated area with some undergrowth are isolated in any real sense. It's close to everything. Homeless people live there. Plus, since there are all kinds of bunkers and stuff in this area, and there's no shortage of like broken bottles and dog crap, kids play around in these areas. Which goes even further to show that people in this park especially would actually go off the beaten path pretty regularly. And let's not forget, the park is right next to a city, so there's thousands of people walking through the area every day, and it's right next to a very popular beach, and people have to walk through the park, through the woods, to get to the beach. The ground is relatively silty and sandy, so you could theoretically dig through it, but that gets into the whole issue of, well, whoever killed her then would have had to hide her body, go somewhere else, find a shovel. Plus, you'd also have to, like, cut through all the roots of the trees unless you were burying her, like, in the middle of the grass of the park, which then you'd definitely be spotted. So, during the investigation, tests were conducted to see how far someone's scream could be heard in the park, and it was determined that it was audible within 200 meters. There isn't a place in the park that is 200 meters away from a walking path. You can't even get 50 meters away from a walking path without being seen. And this is much smaller than like a Central Park or something where, like, yeah, stuff does happen in Central Park because it's so big, there just can't be people there all the time. This is just not very big. In my personal opinion, if Iwona was killed and left in that park, she would have been found on the first day easily just by a passerby. This seems to be something that the police and private investigators overlooked. The first police search of the park didn't happen for weeks, so by that point she would have easily been found. That's not to say there can't be any, helpful evidence in the park, but a whole body, like, definitely not. In the documentary, the lead private investigator lays out his three main theories of what could have happened. Either she was a victim of a crime of opportunity in the park and then hidden there, she was kidnapped and later killed by a random car on the road, or she was taken in a car and then later killed by someone she knew. In my opinion, the first of these theories has no business being on anyone's list, but the later two may have some merit. Whoever killed or took Iwona almost certainly brought her somewhere else in a car, but that brings up the question of who and why. In terms of suspects, 4 main people have been thrown out there, none of which, in my opinion, are fully convincing, but certainly some are more convincing than others. Firstly is Iwona's ex, Patrick. While everyone always suspects the ex, we need to keep in mind that Patrick and Iwona, by all accounts, had good relations. Again, though, this could be incorrect. There was the spat she involved herself with the week before with all his friends, but unless we're missing some super deep and important element to that, it's probably not connected. The big reason that Patrick is suspect is that his whereabouts and statements about his whereabouts on that night of the disappearance are inconsistent and could line up with him being involved. We know that Patrick was at the Banana Beach Club that night, and other people knew it too. Iwona even stopped by there to try and find him. However, he said that he'd left the club around midnight, almost 4 hours before Iwona arrived. But Patrick was lying, and investigators knew this. Based off of the phone records, Patrick was around the area and in a car as late as 3:30 a.m., some 45 minutes before Iwona was last seen, but that could just mean that he hadn't texted people for the last 45 minutes of that night or so. We know that whoever took Iwona must have had a car, and given there was never any sign of a struggle, whether that be screaming or her shoes, or just an eyewitness on the road or one of the buildings nearby, it's also likely that she knew whoever attacked her, since there would be nothing that would have stuck out to a witness. The fact that he lied about and later even admitted to lying about his whereabouts only makes him more suspicious. However, unless there are some dynamics that no one knows about or no one will admit to, he probably didn't have a motive. Next is a man named Christian, who was a seedy man, to say the least. Seedy is an understatement, wow. Who seems like a total piece of crap. Christian ran a prostitution ring in the area, and he had been convicted multiple times for relations with minors. The theory goes that Iwona had actually been working with Christian, and some business complication, maybe over drugs or trafficking or whatever, drove him to kill her or have her taken. However, there is no evidence that the two were familiar with each other or that Iwona was in that line of work, although notably, Christian did know Iwona's new cop boyfriend, Marcin, probably indicative of some corruption in the police department. This could help explain to some degree the fact that the police famously botched this investigation. Just as an example here, the private investigators, like pretty much Poland's version of Doug the Bounty Hunter, they were the first ones to find camera footage of her. Like, the cops didn't even find the camera footage of her. Like, they really sucked. The least likely of these suspects is the Towel Man. This man was seen walking behind her in the last footage of her alive. Many theorized that the Towel Man was responsible for her disappearance. However, I think that's a stretch. Other than him walking near her, there is like zero reason to suspect him. Some people have tried to say that he followed her closely or walked strangely, but I don't really buy that at all. For one, he's like a normal distance away. And also, yeah, he's walking weird because he's obviously, like, very drunk. Footage showed he was at a club earlier that night, actually. He does seem to be sort of watching her, but again, a drunk, middle-aged dude walking behind an attractive woman would almost certainly be looking at her. I think that's pretty normal and not indicative of foul play by itself. The man who eventually was believed to have been the Towel Man turned himself in for questioning many years later, but it was determined he had nothing to do with the case. The only evidence against him is that he was walking the same direction at her at the same time, along with many other people. He may be an important witness, for sure, but unlikely to have killed her. The last suspect is Pavel, one of the guys with Iwona at the clubs the night of her disappearance. Pavel draws suspicion because of his connections to seedy characters in the Zappelt area. He knew bouncers well enough to get underage kids into the bars, and allegedly even called one of these bouncers a couple times the day after Iwona disappeared. He worked with his father at a construction company, but seemed to have a lot of money for his clubbing lifestyle he couldn't explain, something that would be explained over 10 years later when he was arrested on drug charges. He, Christian, and her new boyfriend Madison all seemed to be plugged into the same illicit sex and drug network. And in 2022 and 23, actually when I was living in the area, a club in Sopot was actually searched extensively in relation to the case, which some of those men had relations with. The club did not exist at the time of her disappearance, but some speculate that the move was done to scare people involved into making them do something rash, like moving evidence. And a more interesting but maybe less plausible theory suggests that Iwona was hidden in the building's foundation, which Pavel may have been able to put there because of his construction connections. The search around the building, though, at least publicly, led to nothing. Notably, Iwona's friends' cars were also searched by sniffer dogs for her scent, but no hint of her was found. While this seems to exonerate Patrik and Pavel, it's worth noting that Pavel likely had access to multiple cars at this point. Pavel also played a heavy role in the search effort for Iwona, even from early on, which can be read multiple different ways. Some people say that's indicative of guilt or something. And he allegedly even deleted files from her computer, although again, given his recent arrest, my guess is that would be more related with drug stuff than anything. But again, that could be a motive if things went really wrong on that front. With Pavel, again, the big question is motive. He was involved in arguing with her that night, but it's not known what they were arguing about and why she was upset, so maybe something did come up between them. Maybe it was drug-related. Maybe it had nothing to do with drugs. We don't really know because her friends are kind of cagey and say they don't really remember what it was about and all this stuff, so... Personally, I don't have a strong opinion on who did it. There just isn't enough evidence for anything too much. Circumstantially, I think Patrik makes the most sense, given his phone records and him lying. But I think Pavel might have had more motive, given he was arguing with her that night, and there may have, been a drug connection, and he was involved with illicit networks who could help him hide a body, and he had more to hide, and all this. I think if it was either of them, an accidental killing could be a possibility since neither of them seem to have had a very strong motive. That being said, Iwona was very distracted that night, and she could have been concerned about some new development with Pavel or Patrik, and the rest of the group either didn't know or didn't want to tell anyone about that. But until there's more public evidence, I don't really have a strong take on that. I know that's a disappointing end to this. The Netflix documentary, though, definitely does seem to hint more at Pavel. So that's enough for this video, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. I know this is not my normal type of video. I don't really plan on making more of these types. But if you do like them, let me know, I guess. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.